some of the experience that we have had in Costa Rica and to show you in a practical case how payment for ecosystem services evolved and works in a country like Costa Rica. First of all, it's important to know that Costa Rica started experimenting with ecosystem services and specifically with incentives towards reforestation when we first became aware of the loss of native forests. And this happened about 30 years ago. And the first action that was taken was for the government to start to give an incentive for people, a tax incentive for people who would plant forests, who would reforest. And that happened in 1978, that it was actually put in place. And since then, we've experimented a lot. And we made a lot of mistakes, but we have also learned a lot. And this is maybe a little bit of what I want to share with you today. How does this work? Or can I do it here? Oh, this one, okay. All right. Many of you may have seen this, what I have shown you, that we call the striptease of Costa Rica. And there was all these images of how deforestation proceeded for 50 years or so. And we got to the point where we lost about 2/3 of our forests. Thanks to this payment for ecosystem services and other conservation policies, Costa Rica today is more than 50% forest cover. Now, what we have built back is not the same as what was taken, because you cut primary forest and you build up secondary forest. But it still is the only case, the only developing country that has made a turnaround in forest loss. And this payment for ecosystem services has a lot to do with that. Also, the other big area is the conservation area. Because one important thing to realize is that, I mean, there's two big approaches to land conservation. One is to preserve land for conservation as national parks, protected areas, etc. And the other one is how do you impact private landowners? And that's what payment for ecosystem services becomes very important, because all the payment for ecosystem services is done in private lands. As I mentioned earlier, we started experimenting with the Forestry Act in 1969, but the actual implementation by the finance ministry didn't happen until 10 years later, in 1978. But even then, from 78 to here, we have about 30 years of experience. What did we learn, for example, from the first generation of payment for, let's say, reforestation incentives, or the government's incentives for what now we call carbon sequestration? Because at that time, we didn't count the carbon. We just wanted to plant more forests so that the country wouldn't run out of wood. That was primarily the concern at that moment. And what happened with the fiscal incentive, which was $2,000 per hectare, what happens, you think, wow, this is very good, you pay people to plant. But what happened is that the people who were interested in this program were the people who owed taxes to the government. So there were intermediaries who would buy a farm and sell the tax credits. Okay? And that's fine, but what the people were interested in was the tax deduction. They didn't care if the trees grew or not. So we had more than 25% of the areas that were given this incentives failed because people were interested just in the deductions. So these are the things that you start to learn in a policy situation. So when I was in the government, I was facing this plus another big problem. Since it was a fiscal incentive, the government never knew how much it was going to be until they actually took the deductions. And when it started to get big, they said, forget it, we can't handle this anymore. So we had to go to a new generation of incentives, and we went to actually promoting reforestation with peasants in small landowners, and with a prepayment, where we would give them, let's say, 25% of what the total cost of the plantation so that they could get started, and as they started to reach certain landmarks, they would get, more resources. We also tried things like credits, AAD subsidized credits. We tried several other mechanisms. Before, we started to focus more on a national forestry development fund. And the beginning of this was a debt swap that we did with the Dutch government. And normally the debt swaps have been done only for conservation. And this was the first one that we did all for forestry. And even in 1988, we didn't count the carbon. Because nobody was counting carbon still. But anyway, now we would put this as a carbon deal. Now the most important feature of the present system was a tax, carbon tax, a tax on fuels of 3.5%, okay? That the government of President Figueres established in 1997. So Costa Rica is also the only developing country to have a carbon tax. And that's very unique. And it's unique because it connects the two things. Okay, well, you would say, why would a country like Costa Rica, a developing country that doesn't have any commitments under Kyoto, why would Costa Rica do this? Because we have done this voluntarily. And I'm partly responsible for that in the sense that we've been thinking all along we are eventually going to have to do this. And it's a lot better if you're a leader than a follower. Because it fits with Costa Rica's image, it fits with our, nature-oriented tourism. So it's part of an overall development strategy. And Costa Rica, in this system, has invested $200 million in 10 years, which for a small country, it would be of the hundreds of billions of dollars if you would scale it up to the size of the U.S. So anyway, here's a list of many of the different programs and how we came eventually to a national system of payment for carbon and now for water. It first happened with carbon and then with water. Under this funny-sounding thing, FONAFIFO is the National Forestry Financing Fund. And that is fed 50% by the carbon tax. And the other 50% comes from loans and grants. Costa Rica has taken two big loans and grants from the World Bank and the Global Environment Facility. The last one is a $90 million package. That $30 million loan, $10 million grant from the GEF, and $50 million contribution that comes from the carbon tax and the payment for water services. So that's what's going on right now. When I you know, my boss, when I was at the IDP, was the Minister of Finance. And he said to me, you guys must be crazy taking loans to pay for carbon. And it's true that not too many countries have done that. But why have we done it? Because we want to position ourselves for this coming market. The only problem is that we've been positioning ourselves for a long time, like 15 years, you know, and the market was not ready. We have even 16 million tons of carbon certified by a Swiss certification company. And when President Clinton went to Costa Rica, he was supposed to take out a $20 bill and buy the first ton of carbon from Costa Rica, and the lawyers stopped him from doing it, you know. So it's been a long time coming, but we hope that, as Michael was showing you, this is happening. So the second generation of payment for ecosystem services is what we have now, includes carbon, protection of water, conservation of biodiversity, and scenic beauty. And we have implemented two, the carbon and the water so far. Biodiversity and scenic beauty have been not as easy to develop. You know, the only carbon that has been purchased from Costa Rica was purchased from Norway in 1997. And that was more like a symbolic transaction from a friendly government, you know, wanted to prime up the market. But for a number of reasons that, you know, if you have a lot of time I could get into, the carbon market and the land use emissions have been a lot harder to work. And there's been a lot more political, and in part because of the big role of the U.S. You know, when we started with COP1, that was a long time ago in '95, people were saying all that the U.S. wants to do is buy its way out of the climate convention by purchasing cheap carbon from poor countries. So they want to buy tree cemeteries in Guyana, in the Amazon, and saying we are meeting the climate change convention. And that killed us. That really killed us for a long time. I mean, we're still not over that yet, because this needs to be discussed in Copenhagen. But anyway, the amount has been large, the annual budget around $15 million, that's still important. As the overall balance, now that the total is, as I said, closer to 200 million if you add all the other forest incentives. 8% of Costa Rica is covered by PES. The National Park System, to give you an idea, has 12% of Costa Rica. So this is, in addition to conservation, the most significant thing. It has more than 8,000 landowners who are beneficiaries, and it has had some impact on poverty, women, and indigenous people. But here also is a problem where you cannot maximize everything. You know, people say you should maximize biodiversity through the payment for ecosystem services. Well, if you do that, then you cannot alleviate poverty at the same time because they may not be in the same area. Or you cannot favor, you know, single women heads of household that you have many in Latin America. So that's a problem. You cannot do everything. But the cumulative impact has been very important. I think that you can show with this example that there are win-win solutions that you can achieve. I would follow Michael in saying that there's no magic bullet, there's no single program that will work everywhere. I don't think you'll see another case like Costa Rica, primarily because it's hard to persuade the government to invest so much money in an idea whose time has not yet come. But we are convinced, and Michael has shown you with the growth of the carbon market, that hopefully this idea is one that will catch on and will be able to be applied in different ways throughout the world. Thank you very much.